Good morning. Thank you for setting your alarms early and joining us on this sticky but stunning day. We really appreciate you making the effort to be here today. I'm Michelle, call me Mish, Michelle Letho. I'm the account executive, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to Willyama Togetha. We are Australia's only Indigenous Atlassian Platinum Solutions partner and a Supply Nations registered business. We are proud to pledge 1% of our profits towards supporting Indigenous and veteran not-for-profits, and also in our purpose, engaging and supporting tech pathways for veterans and Indigenous peoples. I'd like to pause here and invite one of our co-founders, Adjunct Professor Kieran Hynes, to provide an acknowledgement of country. Do you need this?
Thanks, Michelle. I think everyone can hear me. It's all good. Thanks, mate. So, I'm going to go off script and start off with a bang, because that's the fun of this. So, acknowledgement of country or a welcome to country. People go, okay, it's done at the footy and whatever, what's it all mean? So, for me, there's the cultural background to a welcome or an acknowledgement of country, which is to do with the fact that spiritually, if you go onto someone's country and something befalls you, if you've been welcomed in, your spirit is safe if something adverse were to happen. And I grew up in Broken Hill, and we didn't really have much of that welcome to country, acknowledgement of country, because it's a long way to walk from anywhere to anywhere in Broken Hill. And you die of thirst before you got anywhere anyway. But as a young army officer in 1993, I was in New Guinea, and we were in the middle of the jungle, literally, and before GPS, and the maps were no good because you couldn't see 5 feet. And we were with a local guide, and he was taking us straight through the jungle. And then we'd stop, and we'd stop for about 45 minutes to an hour. And next minute, another dude would rock out of the jungle in all the traditional clothing, because that's what we lived in. And they'd have a yarn, we'd get the thumbs up, and we'd go for another couple of hours. And it was my first exposure to probably territorial claims without borders, without a bridge to go over, a river to go over. This was literally someone's country. And we were waiting in the middle of the bush, well, jungle, for someone to give us permission to go onto their country. And that happened 3 or 4 times over the next 8 hours, by which time, if someone had left us, something had happened to our guide, might have been army officers, but we were buggered. So I just want to put that in context, that when we call out an acknowledgement of country, because I'm not from here, so for me it's an acknowledgement, I'm calling out that for me, I'm on someone else's territory. So as much as anything, I'm acknowledging that I've been invited into someone else's house or their country or their location. So I'd just like to acknowledge, as a Warramai man, that I'm on Gadigal country of the Eora Nation, and pay respects to their elders past and present, and mainly for their custodianship of the lands and waters, because we wouldn't have this beautiful place to operate from if there hadn't been that custodianship for 60-odd thousand years. So I'd just like to acknowledge that of the people from here.
So, thank you, Kieran, for the context and for the acknowledgement. These lands have always been a place of knowledge sharing, innovation and connection. This morning, let's consider how we can continue building a future where Indigenous peoples and veterans have equal opportunities to participate in the tech sector, a strategic and pivotal growth industry. Willyama Togetha is the only Indigenous Platinum Solutions partner implementing and supporting Atlassian solutions. Our clients include Australian government and large enterprises. We help deliver solutions and services that help leadership and teams, IT, HR, procurement, finance, facilities, and more, to plan and track their work and collaborate together. Excuse the intended pun on together. Our clients include some of the most recognised brands, and they are making a difference by partnering with us. At Willyama Togetha, we believe in taking action and making a difference, and that's why today we are delighted to contribute $50 per attendee towards the GO Foundation, which supports education and cultural opportunities for Indigenous youth. So raise your hand and give yourself a little pat on the back for coming and making a difference today. I'd like to introduce our speakers, who will share their insights on reconciliation in action and how we create a more inclusive, innovative and empowered workforce. Firstly, David Masters, but he goes by both, Head of Global Policy and Regulatory Affairs at Atlassian. I'm glad I don't have that title to have to repeat to people. Dave will speak about Atlassian's reconciliation journey and the company's ongoing commitment to supporting Indigenous reconciliation efforts. As board member of the Future Skills Organisation and a member of Atlassian's Reconciliation Action Committee, Dave has been a key advocate for shaping policies that bridge gaps between technology, industry and Indigenous empowerment. Following this, you've heard from Adjunct Professor Kieran Hynes. He'll join us again. He's not only a proud and forgive me if Warramai man, but he's also a Swans supporter and co-founder of Willyama. He's going to discuss the importance of partnering with businesses that support Indigenous employment. As leader in cybersecurity and Indigenous empowerment, he has been at the forefront of fostering cultural inclusion and innovation within our Australian tech sector. So he'll share his experiences on founding an Indigenous and veteran-owned cybersecurity company and how he's making a positive change in the industry. We're grateful to both David and Kieran for sharing their expertise here with us and their vision for a brighter and more inclusive future. So Dave, we'll kick off with you.
Thank you. Excellent. Now I've got to try and work a Windows machine. I haven't done that for a while. I used to work for Microsoft, so there you go. Here we go. Excellent. As Michelle said, I'm David Masters. I head up our Global Policy and Regulatory Affairs function in Atlassian. Yes, it's a mouthful to say. It's also a lot to explain to people what I do. Broadly, it's engagement with governments around the world. I live in Canberra on Ngunnawal country with Kieran and also Jeff. So Jeff lives in the suburb next to me. It's very Canberra. But I also I was born in Narrandera on Wiradjuri land, and then spent a lot of time in Hay on Nari land. And when I first met Kieran, he asked me, where are you from originally? I said, Western New South Wales, and I told him where it was. He said, that's not west. So it's from Broken Hill. So he's further west than I am, which is fair. I also want to acknowledge that we are meeting today on the traditional, on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation as well, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And walking the streets of Sydney, you are literally walking in the footsteps of those that came before you, because the streets in Sydney were largely built over the top of a series of tracks and paths that existed here for thousands of years. So as you're walking down these streets, you are walking in the footsteps. I also want to acknowledge our wrap and the design from Garrawa Aboriginal Designs, which also is reflected in my t-shirt, and you might see some lanyards as well. It's a collaboration between Karina Jeffrey and Sean Lee, and they're artists from Darwin. So I'll talk to you a little bit about Atlassian's journey on reconciliation. We're pretty late to the party. One of the Atlassian values is open company, no bullshit, and so I'm not going to say, hey, we've done an incredible amount. We were actually very, very early on in our journey, and we've got a lot to do. But back in 2022, there were a group of us that recognised that we had to start going on this journey as a company. Obviously, back then, there was a big discussion nationally about the voice. We wanted to make sure that our voice was part of that conversation, and we really needed to think about what we were doing as a company to actually make that real. So we've just completed our Reflect wrap, which is the first stage. And the Reflect wrap really is just, it's actually a process that's about listening, engaging, and trying to understand more. And for an Atlassian, for an organisation like ours, which is very action-oriented, that's actually challenging to say, hey, we need to take a step back, we need to understand the things that we don't know, and think about how we can actually make an impact here. And so we've been through that process. We're proud to say that we've been engaging with Reconciliation Australia, and they've agreed to allow us to move to the Innovate Wrap. So the Innovate Wrap is a much more action-oriented wrap. And as you'll see, it's actually a fairly long process you go through around a reconciliation action plan. You start in a 12 to 18 month reflect wrap, you then move to an innovate wrap, which is a 2-year process, and then the stretch wrap, which is where you start to go further in terms of your impacts, 3 years, and then elevate, which is the final stage, is another 3 years. So you're on a 10-year journey. And we had to recognise that up front, that we're not going to solve everything to begin with, but we needed to be prepared to go on that journey. One of the things that we've tried to do is just, because we're Team Anywhere, we have people all over Australia. So that's both a strength and a weakness. I'll come back to that in a second. The strength is that we actually have a pretty large footprint to engage. We can also do things like hire people on country, which is not often an opportunity for others. So we're not bound by our office locations, but it also means that we actually have a pretty wide footprint to engage with, and that is challenging. So this is actually from a walk on country that we did in Canberra on Ngunnawal land, and this is Richard Allen, and he has some red ash in his hands, which is also known as the soap tree, and this was at the National Arboretum in Canberra. So if you're in Canberra, it's great because there's actually a lot of the flora that was used by Ngunnawal people as part of their day-to-day lives, and it's a great experience. If you were down there and you want to do a walk, I'd recommend it. We also did walks during NAIDOC week in Melbourne on Wurundjeri land, and also in Sydney here on Gadigal land as well. There are 3 pillars to our wrap. So people, place, platform. People really is that it's about people. It's about growing our talent. It's about exploring talent. Also, I'll come back to some of the challenges, and that's why I think what Kieran's doing is super important. He can talk to you more about that. Place, acknowledging where we are. So we've talked a little bit about Team Anywhere, how we are sort of everywhere, but also in the places where we have office locations. We're building a new building down at Central Station, which some of you may have seen. If you've gotten off there, it's coming out of the ground. Very proud of that. So there's been a lot of engagement around that project as well. And then platform, really, it's like, what do we do as a company, and how can that interface with First Nations people in the things that we do from a product perspective, from an everyday business perspective. Our wrap team is made up of people right across the company. So engineering, people, HR teams, policy, my function, comms, procurement, product sales, DEI, foundational legal. One of the important things of having such a diverse group engaged is that it doesn't get seen as something that's adjunct to the business, that's core to what people do. So I think it's a good thing that we didn't sort of tuck it away in a DEI function or tuck it away as a comms function, because then it takes a certain slant. And so having that broad membership across the organisation of people doing various roles is super important. I want to talk about foundation, and I want to acknowledge Lauren Black from our foundation team, who's also on our wrap committee here, have built some great partnerships. So Nutu College, which is an impact investment that we've made in South Australia. They're an independent not-for-profit. They go from kindy to year 10. They focus on looking at positive academic, vocational and community outcomes, and focus on embedding Aboriginal cultures into the learning experience. So they sort of talk about that as being part of their soul, and that's a really, really great partnership for us. Foundation has at its core a very strong education focus, and so our partnerships tend to be in that education space, which I think is super important in this, and I'll talk about another partnership. Corey Tutt, who some of you may know, founded Deadly Science in 2018. That's another one of our partnerships. Again, their focus is on STEM and on getting resources into schools, getting resources into the hands of Indigenous kids, and helping them to take an interest in science and STEM careers. And since that time, it's now expanded to over 800 schools and community organisations across all states and territories, which is incredibly impressive in a pretty short amount of time. The reason why it's important is in 2020 there was a STEM workforce report, and that highlighted the percentage of Australian non-Indigenous population with a university STEM qualification was 5.2%. So it's already a relatively small number across all the population. The percentage of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders with a university STEM qualification is 0.5%. So 1/10 of the broader demographic. That's a massive discrepancy, and that's really what Corey and his team at Deadly Science are trying to solve. And particularly, that percentage is even lower when you go into remote and rural communities, and that's, again, one of the things that they're very focused on is getting resourcing out into those communities. One of the things that we're very focused on as we're building our new building at Central is that sort of engagement with Indigenous communities there. So we've built a partnership with the Metropolitan Lands Council down there, the Aboriginal Metropolitan Lands Council. We've also got an Indigenous consultancy that's working with us, NARA Consultancy, and we're working with them more broadly as a RAP committee as well. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about the artwork that will be on our building, because I think it's pretty significant. The artwork that you can see behind me is the work of a Wiradjuri artist, Brooke Andrew, and it's known as Giwang Dinawang Yire, which is moon, emu, sun. Amongst other references, the LED artwork speaks of sky country and the emu in the sky, a well-known Aboriginal astronomical constellation that tells an important set of dreaming stories that relate all over Australia with variations on that journey. The other silhouettes include a waxing moon and the sun, which you can see. The artwork will respond dynamically, and so I'll just show you at night time. Respond dynamically to the seasons, to the day, to the temperature, and so will change. The sun will change colour and intensity depending on the time of day and the year. Magenta will indicate extreme heat, and pale yellow will shine when temperatures fall below 10 degrees. The moon will also shift as well to reflect the seasons. We're in the process of engaging and thinking about what other design aspects we can integrate into the building, particularly as we build out the internal. So what are our lessons learned through this process, given we've been on a learning journey? As I mentioned before, Team Anywhere is both a challenge and a strength for us. It's a broad footprint to engage. We've got people everywhere. That is great because we've got an incredible range of Indigenous communities that we can engage with. But it is also a challenge for us. Talent, I think we recognise, and Kieran will probably touch on this a little bit more, it's a small pool of talent. So we talked about Indigenous people with STEM degrees. Indigenous people with technology degrees is incredibly small. There's a lot of us out there sort of looking for that talent, and we're all sort of tripping over each other. So there's a coordination effort that's required, and we've started conversations with our other tech company counterparts to think about how we can coordinate that investment and engagement in education and training. Focal moments, really important. So things like NAIDOC Week and Reconciliation Week, I think they're really important moments to engage the business and to get them interested and engage on First Nations issues. Partnerships need to be meaningful as well, and again, that's why I'm really pleased to be speaking here, because I think the partnership we have with Willyama Togetha is super important going forward, because it is real. It's about real business, real investment, and real employment. And then really that last point which flows from that is really the need to bake the RAP into your daily business. So it can't be sitting over the side as a DEI initiative. It needs to be baked into everything that you do. And if it's not, then it will be just seen as a side issue. So with that, I will hand over to our more interesting speaker, who's got much more interesting things to say, and hand over to Kieran.
So the purpose for today is talking about reconciliation in action. I think for everyone, that has probably something that conjures up. Reconciliation as a concept. And for this, I wrote a white paper. I don't know where we got to with that, but there'll be a white paper released around this, which is my version of the journey of reconciliation in action. And reconciliation, I think we all use the term, but for me, actually going back to the root of what reconciliation actually meant in that context was actually a bit of a journey. So it started with the 1991 report into Aboriginal deaths in custody. And it called out that there was disproportionate incarceration, but then from that there was disproportionate deaths in custody as well. And it led to a whole lot of social justice considerations that came under the umbrella of reconciliation. Now, the second part of that was, for those that follow the Aboriginal policy changes, was closing the gap and the various iterations around closing the gap. Now that came from a 2005 report by Professor Tom Calmer And for those that don't know Tom, I suggest you look him up. He started in the Northern Territory, went to Adelaide, did some uni around Aboriginal medical health, and has turned that into probably one of the most impactful careers I can imagine. I'm also fortunate to call him a friend and a mentor, and he was someone I bounced off quite a few of the elements that I called out in my white paper. And one of the key elements out of that was that 2005 paper called out that at the time there was a massive disparity in Aboriginal health. Massive disparity. And predominantly it's in that remote and rural, out of mind, out of sight. Now, as a segue, I'm from Broken Hill, that's what actually Willyama means. And for 12 days, a city of 20,000 people in the middle of Australia didn't have electricity last year. So this isn't a Indigenous or non-Indigenous problem. Remote and rural is a real problem that impacts on everyone. Now we've got a mining town that relies on water and electricity. They built a solar farm, no one put in batteries or anything to back it up, so the Jenny hadn't been run. So a town with nearly 20,000 people had no electricity for 12 days. That's third world stuff. That's not Australia. It's definitely not the Australia I want to live in. So 2005 was a social justice report around medical inequity and health inequity that turned into the next year a Closing the Gap report, because it was broader. There's socio-economic factors, there's social justice factors. Now, for my personal experience, I grew up in Broken Hill. At the time, it was a mining town, it was great. Very few Aboriginal people in town, because you didn't have a job in Broken Hill, you weren't in town. So the only people that were Aboriginal that identified were those that came in from stations and were doing school. But apart from that, the Aboriginal people that came in from the stations on weekends had a bender. If anyone come out from, say, Sydney that didn't have a job, they'd take them out the back and say, this isn't the town for you. They'd get a touch up, they'd be sent back to Sydney, because only people that adopted Broken Hill were really part of the community. And that was fascinating as a kid growing up in town. And my old man was the deputy town clerk, so we had a lot of exposure to what a union town looks like, but it was also that community when you're isolated. And I didn't see some of the disadvantage that other parts, predominantly South Australia, Northern Territory and North Queensland and East and Western Australia experienced, because Broken Hill was quite an affluent town in that context. But over the Closing the Gap period from 2006 onwards, it called out what's now 17 different elements around closing the gap and the reconciliation piece. And the fundamentals were Aboriginals get the short end of every stick known to man. If there's a stick, Aboriginal person in Australia has the wrong end of it. And that's everything from access to school, going on to year 12, going on to other tertiary education. And without education, I would argue you're disadvantaged from the Western economy. And if you don't have access to the Western economy, it's hard for you as an individual to get employment, get good employment. And my argument is everyone can get a job. Macca's will give you $12 an hour to lean on a broom, right? But you need to have a career, and that career then takes you into house ownership, and I'll touch on that in a sec, and various other things that only happen when you've got those first couple of stages. Now, I get whacked regularly by why can't you do it in a cultural way? What's a cultural way of making a quid in Australia? Okay? The argument would be, why aren't you doing painting or whatever? If you're really Aboriginal, why aren't you doing native foods and whatever? Well, I was lucky. My parents encouraged me to do school, and I got into the army, did a degree, had a really fortunate career that was structured around IT when IT was taking off, and ended up doing 3 or 4 significant programs. Then a few body parts fell off, as the militaries want to do, and I ended up becoming an IT contractor and then starting Willyama in 2016. Now on that journey, a few things happened. My nan had been relocated from her home in Maitland because her father was a white station owner, and she was going to get taken on a mission in the early 30s. So Nan had been relocated. Nan was now in her 60s and wanted to get in touch with her Aboriginal heritage. In Broken Hill at the time, the only way you get anywhere was a 12-hour, 14-hour train ride. So Nan was jumping on the train. There was no internet, and going back and photocopying church records. So Nan had done all this. Now, unfortunately, she then ended up with severe Alzheimer's, and Mum found hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these photocopies where Nan was trying to get in touch with her identity. So Mum then took that on, because with that much dislocation, there were some challenges in our family. I grew up knowing that I had black heritage. My Nan was black. On one side, Nan had 3 kids, a black one, a not as black one, and basically a white one with an afro. The white one with the afro turned out to be Mum. Okay, and then she married an Irishman, and you get this, right? So, but 2 of my sisters, quite dark-skinned. My brother, who's a ranger, hooked up with an Aboriginal girl, and now they've got 2 kids. One's blonde-haired, blue-eyed, pale-skinned girl, and the other one's a dark-haired, dark-eyed, dark-skinned boy. Same parents. Genetics is a funny thing. But here I was now having an association that, bizarrely, on one side I've got Mauritian, which is African via the West Indies, and Aboriginal heritage. And then on the other side we've got the Irish and Scottish, and you know who won genetically, right? But so I was told, so my nickname as a kid was Joel, because the Aboriginal people in Broken Hill that I played footy with knew my uncles, knew they had afros, knew they were black fellas. So I hadn't, when I had hair, it was an afro. And my nickname was Joel, as in Joel Gardner. Now, for those not old enough, he was about a 6'8" black fella with big hair, right? So that was my nickname playing footy. Weirdest thing ever, going to a footy game. Why are you called Joel? And they'd go to the Aboriginal bloke who was patently looked Aboriginal, and his nickname, different time, was Abbo. Abbo, why do you call him Joel? Oh, because he's a black fella. How does that work? He's black, his family's black. But that was at the time from the West Indian side, because that was way cooler than being Aboriginal. So, turns out, absolutely, and equally, got the African background. Apparently it's Bantu and Southern Bantu. I don't know quite what that means, but it's the African heritage. And then the Aboriginal heritage. And that was a journey for me, because I was coming to this knowing, growing up, being identified as black. My uncles, cousins were all darker than us. And on the telly, the good footballers were black. I wanted to be blacker, so I'd get sunburnt just to try and play footy better. I don't know how that worked as a sophisticated 5 or 6 year old, but that's where we ended up with, right? And footy, by the way, anyone in the room's confused, there's only one football in Australia, the Australian rules football. If you talk about anything else, it's not football. And anyone who talks about soccer needs to know where the word soccer comes from, and that's a whole different story we can talk about later. So the key thing is, I knew I was black. I'd grown up with black heritage, but I didn't know what it really meant. So through this period while Nan was doing that, I was in the army. And all of a sudden Mum said, Kieran, you've got to start following this up because I'm getting nowhere. And so my journey, a whole lot of people that have known me from the army or what have you go, I didn't know you were Aboriginal. A couple of things there. No one ever asked. It was never a box that was ticked or asked for or anything in my whole military career. So when people have come up to me since, I go, when was that a thing? And I still remember a day I had a photo of Nan's 50th birthday. And there was all that from pure white, probably me, all the way through to Nan who was black and the uncles and aunties all through it. And a guy went, there's black people in your photo. Is it? I'd never put that black in context. And I'd never had someone else react to the fact that I had dark-skinned people in my family. That was the first time when I was 19 years old. So for me, there was a whole lot of, what does this mean? And that kept with me. Now, during this period, my brother, the ranger, unfortunately became a drug addict. He dealt with different issues. And I'm not going to put that down to anything else. Same parents, my parents are still married. I can park all the socioeconomic normal stressors. But in this case, he became a drug addict. But he met an Aboriginal girl in rehab. He'd already had one family with 3 kids, and then he met an Aboriginal girl, and that's where my niece and nephew came out of that relationship. Now, the interesting thing there in parallel was he and her were both drug addicts. The children got removed from their care. The other family looked more Aboriginal, but in New South Wales, when you're doing an interfamilial, it's guardianship. It's not an adoption, it's guardianship, where you become the adult custodian for these children. very traumatic experience for everyone involved, and the kids were 2 and 1 and a bit at the time, 11 months between them. But my sister had to go through then the proving Aboriginal connection, because when it's Aboriginal kids involved, you need to validate that. The other family, unfortunately, had issues with stolen generation. So they could only go back 2 generations. We went back 9. And that was probably at the time where the sense of identity really kicked in for the family, because now I had a government document that said I was Aboriginal back to early 1800s. And being an army officer, sometimes it's got to be in writing before my head can get around it, right? Former army officer. And so these were the things that impacted on my life. And as I'm going through, I'm trying to look at what future of some of these people have. At this stage, one of my cousins, who was patently dark, alcohol problems coming out his wazoo. My uncle, his father, was in his 5th relationship and was a broken toy. And the only job he could get in his 50s was in aged care health, as in picking people his age up in and out of beds. And all of a sudden I looked around and we had some really dysfunctional elements in my family. So Make a Difference probably had its genesis there, and my old man was heavily involved in Apex and anything that can help the community. So I had that real community spirit from my old man, and that probably drove founding Willyama, because it was probably 5 or 6 years you've got an idea before you actually kick something off. And for me, it was 2016, I went, it's time to really lean into this. Fascinating. I had the highest government clearance. I'd done whole of government contracts. I was pretty well regarded as a white IT project manager. As soon as I identified as Indigenous, no one rang me back. Really bloody weird. And I spent 4 years in the back office trying to create Willyama. And my wife's going, you're going to get a job soon? The public service is looking quite good right now. And maybe it's a bit of stubbornness, but I went on my journey. And my journey hasn't stopped, and I don't know where my journey will stop, but I'm on a journey. Now, where that segues to is anyone can make money in Canberra. I'm not being facetious. If you can't make a quid in Canberra, well, maybe commercial world's not for you, right? Between the public service and the unis, there's so many opportunities there, it's ridiculous. But I want to do something different. Story of my life, I always try to look at a different angle on things. So making a difference was a challenge. So I wanted to be overtly Indigenous. I own my own business, Willyama. I employ and prioritise Aboriginal and veteran employment. Now, that was confronting because Canberra's quite a challenging place to get work. Notwithstanding what I said before, but as soon as I identified as Indigenous, it was, who's your capability partner? What do you mean? This is my company. I'm the capability we're putting forward. No, who's your real? And I'm going, what do you keep asking about who's the real entity? Well, everyone else comes in, says they're Aboriginal or they've got an Aboriginal partner, but the reality is it's mainstream company X that's doing all the work. And I went, no, I'm doing it myself. No, mate, we're not going to go with you. You're too high risk. But 5 years ago when I was working at this company, you hired me and we did a good job. Yeah, but you weren't black then. Or was that effect? Then I'd go into contract negotiations. Here's the rate card, but you can't charge that. What do you mean I can't charge that? Oh, you have to go lower than that, otherwise we won't give you the work. But it's a rate card on a service. Yeah, you got to go lower. So it was a really weird journey creating Willyama and going into getting government work. And at the same time, we were trying to invest in a whole lot of Aboriginal programs. And the more you unpack in the Aboriginal space, the more you find, and I don't want to use the word racism, but there's definitely a disconnect. That as soon as you identify as Aboriginal, decisions get made that don't appear to align to decisions that would logically be made. And that is something that all the staff that join Willyama confront. All of a sudden they're having a yarn and someone takes a different perspective because you're an Aboriginal business. And that's where reconciliation comes in. Aboriginal people should have a chance to, one, enjoy all the benefits of the greatest country on earth, but also people need to reflect that their background may not be yours. And a couple of examples of that I'd like to bring into this are, out of Microsoft, they had one Aboriginal intern. And we've got an intern here today, Dara Gill, so Isabella. And he arrived, my mate Dave Andrews rang me and said, we've got this guy, he's like a shag in a rock. Every time something comes on the news about Aboriginal stuff, he's being asked and the poor bastard just doesn't know where to look, right? So, do you want to hire him? And I said, mate, absolutely. So we picked up Jeff. Now Jeff's 27 at the time. And just to give you a microcosm, Jeff bounced around the home care, out of home care solution, 16 homes in 12 years. It turns out my cousin was his social worker. So there was a connection there. The family name Maynard, so if anyone knows John Maynard, he's Uni of Newcastle. Professor John Maynard, he's my uncle. And his grandfather, Fred Maynard, founded the first Aboriginal civil rights movement. So we've been ratbags for a long time. And it turned out that Belinda had been his care worker in Sydney. And this guy had spent, from the ages of 4 to 17, in and out of 16 different homes. So he rocked up and he left home and became a chef over a journey because he was hungry all the time as a kid. Imagine that. His visceral need to eat led to a job because he'd been hungry his whole time. And then he wanted to change his career. So he's rocked up, and this is not a criticism, this is an observation. Dirty pair of sneakers, dirty pair of tracksuit pants, and a nerd t-shirt was basically the only clothes he had when he arrived. Jeff now, he's just come back from the Philippines, he's now married with a child, got a driver's license, got a car. Now, I know for everyone in this room, so what? That is a unbelievable journey from a kid that had no start. And he's just come back from the Philippines and he raced into my office as soon as he got back to show me all the handmade shoes. He's now buying adult shoes and adult pants, right? This is a massive change for this person. That's a sort of change in people. Now, we've got another guy who 2 years ago was fencing in Lightning Ridge. Now, I don't know how many people have done fencing, banging star pickets and digging in posts. 42 degrees is not the conducive environment for building fencing. So Tom's 38, never had an office background, never had the education. We, through various mechanisms, set up a program called the Willyama Cyber Training Program. We won the National Award last year for the Cyber Training Program of the Year. Tom's a graduate of that. He's now gone from literally digging holes to in an office, and he laughs at it every day. We flew him down to Melbourne for the CyberCon there last year. First time he'd been on a jet, first time he'd seen a building more than 7 stories, stayed in a really nice hotel, this was good, he was in heaven, right? But the key thing for him is he's now on a career path that didn't exist to him 2 years ago in Lightning Ridge. Now, where I'm going with all of that is there's experiences in the Aboriginal sector, and I'm not saying it's different to other migrant communities or whatever, but for some reason, the Aboriginal sector is getting the short end of that magical stick in everything they do. And for us to take someone on and get them to the point where they're employable, we've had 29 people come into the business, Aboriginal people come into the business, that haven't stayed with the business. They found IT wasn't for them. They've got a clearance and been offered better roles, more opportunities. So we keep going through this program and we keep evolving and iterating to try and create opportunities for Aboriginal people where we can. It is bloody hard. That investment, that cultural safe space, that taking people that don't have a traditional background and trying to give them a career path is bloody hard. It's time consuming. And invariably, the only phone calls we get is, do you have a 15-year experience DBA in your bottom drawer? And to Dave's point before, and in fact we're at the Westpac building. Now I went to the US with Supply Nation in 2017. Westpac at the time were the golden children of the reconciliation movement. They'd gone from 3 Aboriginal staff in the company to 300 in 2.5 years. 3 to 300. Now if you extrapolate that over the ASX top 100, all of a sudden, by all accounts, there was now something like 4,000 Aboriginal people that hadn't been statistically in work that were now in work. That bucket got pillaged in that 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. And Dave, you've called out Atlassian's late to the piece. The phone calls I get for, do you have 14 ready to go systems engineers who are Aboriginal in your bottom drawer? And if they could have a clearance and 3 degrees, that'd be great. No, that bucket got emptied quite a few years ago. So what I say is, no, but if you work with us and you've got that work that's 5 or 6 years out, we'll start now in building that team, building that program, building that capability. But you've got to work with us on that. No, mate, we need them tomorrow for the project to start. Okay, so we get to that point. What we've then had to do, and it's another one, we've identified that we only want to take on work where we can build a team, where we manage that team. The key thing about managing the team is we are then responsible for the people that work in that team. We've got, by all accounts, the largest supply chain cybersecurity contract in Australian history. I just want to say that again. An 100% Aboriginal and veteran-owned business has the largest cybersecurity supply chain contract in Australian history. We do 2,000 businesses on behalf of Defence. Defence is outsourced supply chain security to us. We've got Aboriginal people on that contract, veterans on that contract, and Aboriginal veterans. I would argue that if we didn't have that contract, none of those people would be even exposed to that career. Now, that's the thing that we're trying to do. So to come on a journey with us about making a difference, reconciliation is about treating us as a capability, and then we enact the Indigenous engagement piece that underpins that. And here we are today at, well, we're in the Westpac building, but it's an Atlassian event, and we're here as Willyama Togetha. Now, to explain that, you can buy software in most cases from anyone. That's a transaction. 9 times out of 10, you send an email, you get a code back, magic, you've got software. You can do that with anyone. Why I'd argue that we're here today, and I've got Peter here from CommBank, is we really try to turn those dollars into making a difference. Now, without going overboard, I've got a 10-year-old car in the car park. Money doesn't float my boat. These guys all laugh at me. I've got the worst dress sense. I wear the same clothes every day. I'm not that guy, right? But by spending, we spend on the local footy clubs. We spend on the local basketball referees program because Aboriginal kids play basketball, Aboriginal kids play footy. So we invest in the community. We got approached last year, and when I say we, Jeff and I. So Jeff's here as the principal of Togetha. And it was an opportunity where CommBank not only wanted to buy some software, but they wanted to buy software to lean into the reconciliation process. Now, the narrative went along the lines of CommBank saying, I want it to be legitimately Indigenous, so it's got to be majority Indigenous owned. Atlassian said, we want it to be majority Atlassian partnership. So we were a green banana, and there was 2 800-pound gorillas. So we said, you both want 51%. I can't do the maths and make it work. Can you guys come back with an answer? So we became a 50-50 at that point, which is Willyama Togetha. Now, interestingly in that wasn't a software transaction. That was a services transaction, because the narrative the entire time was not only buying software, but buying the capability, the services that allows employment to be developed. And I just wanted you to think that through. You can buy software from anyone, anytime, anywhere. You can buy products from anyone, anywhere. But if you engage with an Indigenous business, we effectively become the proxy. You can't go out and hire those 300 Aboriginal people because that bucket doesn't exist. But we will try and fill that bucket for you. But we need to have revenue to do that. It's straight dollars, right? So that's part of that program. Now, the exciting thing about this relationship now with CommBank is they bought Atlassian. For 3 weeks, it was the largest Atlassian deal in Australian history. Then my mates over at SciPac did one with Defence. So for 3 weeks, we were, and then we weren't. But it was exciting at the time. The key thing about that is we're now trying to look for building a team around that has Aboriginal staff in it, that actually creates, and this is people right now that don't work in software. I can't name you a single Aboriginal person that works in software. So we're going to have to create that. We're going to hire a whole lot of people over the next 5-10 years who some get software sales, enterprise support, right? Some won't. And then we've got to pivot in the business to find roles for them. But every time you engage with a company like Willyama Togetha, and I'd argue we're one of the few where it's 100% Aboriginal owned capability, so I've got 70 odd staff nationally, and a great platinum Atlassian partner. It's a true joining of capabilities. It's not one person on one side and a multinational on the other. It's a true capability. That opportunity there is we will actively seek to meet a reconciliation outcome. We will drive that so that when we hire, we'll preference where we can Aboriginal people. Now, one of the things we're looking at is service desk. Everyone goes, who cares, right? Service desk can be physically dislocated, and we can take that to an Aboriginal community. And for those that aren't aware, Queensland Government, Fujitsu and Telstra started one 3 years ago in Cherbourg. 16 Aboriginal staff in the first cohort, 9 in the second one. We're now talking about 20 odd people in Cherbourg who systemically no one in their family had a job. The mechanics now put on an apprentice because there's enough cars in the town. These are the things that flow on, right? And every time you do something with an Aboriginal business that shows investment and capability development, you're actually changing lives. And I know that sounds a bit mystical, but the reality is Jeff, Tom, Brenton. Brenton was a printer repairman. Now he's just won an award as a cyber young achiever or something, right? These guys never had this as an opportunity. They were always given the menial jobs. We're trying to give people a real opportunity. That's the journey of reconciliation, and that's the one I'd encourage you to explore those opportunities with Willyama Togetha and other companies like us. I'm now happy, if anyone's got any questions, to hijack this and turn it into Q&A.
Yeah.
So.
I don't know whether Kieran will take a seat because he likes to wander. But I have the mic here, so I'm happy to pass the mic over to if anyone in the audience has any questions for either Dave or for Kieran.
Hi, my name is Chantal. I'm from Global Resource Advisory Board. My question today, how Atlassian ensuring that Indigenous employees are not only recruited, but only not like right now they are climbing leadership role and you are mentoring them and their voice like being heard and they are a decision maker. What we identify during diversity and inclusion, Indigenous and the other segment like refugees and LGBTQ+ disability, many companies start making advantage by ticking these boxes and forget about these people. What policy in place in Atlassian to ensure those people they are on the track for a leadership role?
Sure.
Thank you.
It's a very good question, and as I said, we're at the. Thank you. Thanks, Michelle. As I said, we're at the start of our journey. I think we've reviewed one of the things you go through as part of the Reflect Wrap is reviewing your internal policies, just to make sure that there's nothing there inherently that would block the hiring of Indigenous people and then their progression through the company. Now, that is just saying that basically, does everyone broadly have an even playing field? To Kieran's point, then you need to go further because are those people even getting an opportunity to get to the front door to get in the first place? One of the challenges we had through our, just being completely candid, we had through our RAP process was you need to ask people to self-identify as Indigenous. You can ask them through HR, it'll be in their file potentially if they've ticked that box. They may not have. But you've got to create sort of a space where they're like, I'm comfortable putting my hand up and saying I'm Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. And we're fortunate enough that we have a few on our RAP committee. We ran to again picking up on Kieran's point, we ran an Indigenous traineeship program, and we had pretty mixed success with that. We had one guy basically. We hired 5 and we hit 20%. So we have one guy that still works for us out of Cairns. But we learn a lot through that. Like we learn a lot through here's what works and here's what doesn't work, and we tried to kind of probably do it on our own as well. And I think to Kieran's point, actually working with a partner who's got that experience, who understands what works and what doesn't work, who's been on that journey for longer than we have, I think is the way to sort of approach it. To come to the point around progression, look, I think it's one of those things where I think we just have to be mindful of it. And I think as we go on this sort of journey, we need to sort of look at the experiences of people who are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander in our company, and just sort of understand their experiences, and really listen and talk to them and see whether have they run into any barrier in that journey, either systemic or unwritten or cultural or whatever it might be, and learn from that and really document that and carry it forward. So yeah, look, to be completely blunt, as I said, we're the company no bullshit is one of our values, and we're very early on that journey. So.
I don't think so.
I can just talk to you about it.
Okay, thank you.
This one, yeah.
It's the Northern English.
There you go.
Speaking of, thank you.
There you go.
So I worked in recruitment, I worked in recruitment for many years before I moved into program management. And one of the things that I found really quite overwhelming coming to Australia 13 years ago was working in banking and insurance, hiring and recruiting people from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities would be achieved. And there'd be this kind of big tick box of yes, we've hired somebody, but onboarding, managing, support for leaders in terms of cultural awareness was really challenging. I was fresh into Australia. I had a really beautiful lady who was Torres Strait Islander, and she had a loss of a relative, and the level of support was really minimal, and it was really overwhelming for me as a people leader to understand, well, how do I then support this level of leave and absence and so it'd be really good to understand how the relationship you talk about together would manage that team of people. It'd be good to understand the benefits and how you'd help organisations like in banking and insurance overcome some of those challenges that I faced all those years ago.
What you're calling out is the cultural nuances in the Indigenous sector. So invariably it's called sorry business. And I've had probably 50 phone calls in the last 5 years where this is frog shit. They want to take 12 days off because some auntie died. Okay, so a couple of things there. Let's just wind back. Sorry business in the Indigenous sector, especially in more culturally strong environments. You are considered the child, potentially, of your parents' siblings. So it's 2 or 3 layers out from what a Western family would consider family. That is a fundamental mind shift. If you think that your auntie is your auntie in a Western society, if they pass away, you might have spoken to them once in the last 5 years, life goes on, right? But if you consider them your mother, your mother's passed away. But she's not mother to you, because when you go out that 2 or 3 layers, you may have the equivalent of 20 or 30 children who are all cousins in Western civilizations that are your brothers and sisters, and that person is your parent in that model. So when I say to people, sorry business can be 6, 8, 12 days, and that doesn't include the fact that it could be an isolated community, and it's 1 or 2 days to get there and 1 or 2 days to get back. And invariably you may have, if you're in a proper job, you may have the only car. So you're grabbing 6 people from all over the place to go back to that funeral and all the events associated with that funeral. And they're just having a lend. No one needs 12 days, 14 days or 6 days for a funeral. And when you explain in the context that it's legitimate, especially in more cultural communities and more isolated communities, that's a big deal. Now, the other aspect for that is that taking the negative approach that someone's taking a lend instantly puts that person in an uncomfortable position. And the Western prioritisation would be your job comes first. in a family and cultural based environment, your family comes first. And that's a real disconnect. So this person may have been the most professional person in your office, but when cultural norms kick in, that's a protocol they can't walk away from. So I just ask everyone, and this is one of the core things that probably partnering with an Indigenous owned company does. We call it mentorship. You can use whatever word you want, but the reality is a question like that, is this fair income? And we can break that down into the context. All of a sudden you've then got a frame of reference for someone needing time. It's not wanting time, they're not trying to take 12 days off, they just culturally need that time.
And similar like miscarriages, the policies put in place to protect, whereas it's making sure that the policy's there to back it up. And I think that's one of the challenges that we had at the time, that they didn't exist.
Yep.
So we couldn't get that backing.
But now you can be a champion for that cultural need.
Great question and great answer. I think this is the last question before we wrap up.
Wrap up. Get it? Right.
And together puns abound. Apparently the quote about great artists stealing is misattributed to Picasso, but I wondered, like, both within Australia and internationally, where you were looking at other organisations and companies and going, like, we could learn from that programme, that approach that's being done. I asked the same question on a Supply Nation webinar recently. I thought it was really interesting where people be learning from Native American communities and things.
So globally, probably North America, in particular Canada, has done it really well. Has done Indigenous engagement really well, First Nations engagement. Chad, who's from Akana, so mindful of the time, but there's still some background here. So in the US, if you're on a reservation, so Native American lands, you can't do anything commercial on that land, right? So the Native American community's got to own that commercial engagement. So what it meant was through the 80s and the 90s, especially with a lot of military bases in the US, they were really struggling to engage with the local community. And we've all seen the movies where the only income that Native Americans can do, because they're on the worst country, is run a casino or what have you, right? There's a guy called Chad. Chad is a Native American. He started engaging with the John Deeres and these other companies, Case and Cat and all of that, and said, I'll be your Native American lead, but anything you want to do, sell John Deere to the community, you come through me. Now he's turned that into, everyone's a billionaire these days apparently, but he's anecdotally very wealthy from that. Now, a couple of things that happened during that time was in the US, if you're working on Native American lands, 25% of federal government funding has to be spent in that country on that land. So if the country or the land doesn't produce anything, it's hard to do that. So Chad's an innovator. He's done a ton of work around logistics. So someone else has got cattle. This Air Force base wants to sell meat. He then does the logistics that Aboriginal First Nations community creates the beef. His fridge trucks take it to that community, sell to that Air Force base. So all of a sudden that 25% is being met. But now you've got a logistics commercial entity, you've got a cattle production entity, this one's got frozen and slaughtering and whatever. You've created like 3 different employment cycles from one contract. That's where other countries do it well. Now in the US predominantly, so in the US there's 2 categories for minority ownership, and it's based on tax breaks. So 0 to 500k turnover, you get a big tax break. 500k to 2 mil, you get another tax break, not as big. So in Alaska, where there's a lot of oil, and the First Nations people own the oil, what they do is it's cheaper for them to spin up a new company every time they hit 2 mil revenue than it is to actually keep running that at the higher tax break. So there's all these things now that there's a couple of those First Nations communities in Alaska that they have 5,000 or 6,000 corporations, and there's a couple of people whose whole job is spin up a company, 2 million revenue, close it down, spin up, close it down. So what I'd argue is in Australia, we've got a couple of fundamental disconnects. One is 50-50 is tolerated and 50-50 is abused. So when you go away to the NMSDC, the National Minority Supplier Diversity Council, Development Council, same words used in 2 different contexts, same letter, Some things are diversity conferences, some are development conferences, but the rest of the acronym stays the same. They get weirded out that in Australia you can have a 50-50. That's not majority control. Yeah. In the US, you've got to spend 2 years being a dedicated part of the business. You're on the leases, you're on the insurances, you've got a role on the org chart, you're a signatory on the bank account. None of those are tested in Australia. So I would say we've got policies. We would be as successful as anyone if there was governance of those policies, and I would argue there's no governance. And I'd also argue that if someone's obtaining financial benefit by deception, there's a really simple word for that, and it's called fraud. The first time that someone goes to jail for abusing a system, I think we'll see a change in behaviour. And the key outcome from that is that means legitimate Indigenous businesses will then be able to stand alone without having the non-Indigenous partner just being propped up by a single Indigenous person who's an entity. And there's nowhere else in the world where a JV is one person on one side and a 50,000 multinational on the other side. So other countries do it well, other countries do it authentically, other countries have a fair income federal governed policy. So I think we're still a long way, notwithstanding the fact they roll out the $9 billion of spend. I think if you actually unpack that and how much went to actually Aboriginal entities, I think you'd find the number is vastly different. And I think we've got a long way to go around governance.
Great question. I look, as we conclude today, I was going to say wrap up, but as we wrap up today, firstly, I'd love to thank our panellists, Dave and Kieran, for the insights that they've shared. I'd also like to thank each of you for your support and attendance today. It's through this kind of engagement and your interest in reconciliation and action that we can make a critical step forward. So at Willyama Togetha, we are committed to make that difference, and you've heard from Kieran just how that is done. So our action today is to get in touch with each of you to continue that conversation and see how we can collaborate together. If you are continuing, Atlassian have a team on tour event at the ICC in Sydney. So if you have registered for that, we have a booth at the event. So feel free to drop by, say hello, and meet our extended team, so we can continue that conversation. We will follow up as well and let you know what the total was for your attendance today that we're donating to the Go Foundation. Every person that registers for our mailing list on our booth at the ICC will continue to donate an extra $10 towards that Go Foundation support, and we'll be presenting a cheque to them tomorrow. Thank you.
Just by that, for those that aren't aware, the Go Foundation is the name of two Aboriginal superstars from the Swans, Adam Goods and Mickey O'Loughlin. So G for Goods, O for O'Loughlin, and that's the Go Foundation. And it's funding support for Aboriginal kids to have access to mainstream education, especially if they come from a remote and rural area where they need to go to a residential program. The Go Foundation funds that.
So thank you. Please feel free to take some extra catering with you. There's plenty of food and drink. So we'd like to be sustainable and repurposed, so please take some food. We also have some battery chargers to keep you on the move and very much in line with our theme. So feel free to take a gift with you as you leave. Thank you.